There is an island in Japan where the people get older, but they do not seem to fall apart at the rate everyone else does. On this island, roughly 1 in every 10 residents lives past 100 years old. That is not a typo. The centenarian rate there is among the highest documented anywhere in the world, sustained across multiple generations of careful demographic study. They do not take large numbers of pharmaceuticals, they do not follow Western dietary advice, and they do not count macros. What they do eat, every single day, is a plant that grows so aggressively that cutting a leaf at dawn produces a new leaf by the following morning. The locals have eaten this plant in their soups, in their teas, and in everyday cooking for at least 3 centuries. That is the long stretch of continuous human use sitting behind the laboratory science I'm about to walk through. This is Dr. Kenzo longevity. The plant bleeds yellow when you cut it, a bright golden yellow sap that no other common food plant produces in the same way. The locals named it accordingly. In their language, the name translates roughly to tomorrow's leaf because of how quickly it regrows. For most of the last 3 centuries, it was eaten daily on a small group of Japanese islands and almost nowhere else on Earth. The main island where it grew, Hachijojima, sits about 290 kilometers south of Tokyo, rising from the Philippine Sea on volcanic soil. For centuries, the Japanese government used Hachijojima as a place of exile, sending political prisoners and inconvenient nobles there to be forgotten. The exiles discovered the plant growing wild on the volcanic cliffs, where almost nothing else would survive, and they ate it because they had little else. What they noticed over generations was that they lived longer than the people on the mainland who sent them there. Over time, that observation turned the plant from survival food into local medicine, passed down through families and across generations on the islands. The Americans, who occupied Japan after the Second World War, restructured Japanese agriculture toward Western crops. And within 1 generation, this plant retreated to the islands. The mainland mostly forgot about it, but the islands kept eating it. And those same islands now contain the highest concentration of centenarians per capita anywhere on Earth. Okinawa alone has roughly 3 times as many 100-year-olds per capita as the United States, depending on which year and methodology you use. That gap has been narrowing slightly in recent decades, as younger Okinawans adopt more Western dietary patterns, but the older generations still stand as a remarkable demographic outlier. A caveat up front, this video is not promising that one plant explains those longevity numbers because no single food ever does. The dietary patterns of Okinawa involve dozens of variables: low calorie density, high vegetable intake, social connection, and physical activity into old age. But one ingredient in that pattern caught the attention of European researchers because of what happens when you isolate it in a laboratory. Today I'm walking you through what that plant appears to do at the cellular level. Then I will explain why it has been almost invisible in the United States and how the science actually reads when you read it carefully. Quick thing before we go further, if this kind of breakdown is what you have been looking for, subscribe and hit the bell. There is a new video on this channel every day on the next strange thing your body is doing right now. Now back to the mechanism, because the interesting part is not the longevity statistics. It is what scientists found when they looked inside the cells. In 2019, researchers at a European university published a paper in Nature Communications, one of the most respected scientific journals in the world. The lead authors were based at the University of Graz in Austria, a group with a long track record in autophagy and aging research. They had isolated a specific compound from this plant, a flavonoid called 4',4 dimethoxychalcone, abbreviated as DMC. They applied DMC to yeast cells, and the yeast cells lived longer. They applied it to fruit flies, and the fruit flies lived longer. They applied it to a small worm called C. elegans, which is used in aging research because of how cleanly it ages, and the worms live longer. The mechanism in every case was the same. DMC activated a cellular process called autophagy. Autophagy is the cleaning process your cells use to remove damaged proteins, broken mitochondria, and malfunctioning components before they accumulate into disease. The word literally means self-eating, because the cell wraps damaged components in a membrane and breaks them down for recycling inside itself. When autophagy works well, your cells stay clean and resilient. When it slows down, cellular damage accumulates and contributes to many of the diseases of aging. It is the same process that fasting activates, and it is the same process that researchers studying caloric restriction have been trying to mimic for decades. This is why the discovery was published in a major journal, not because the plant cures anything. The reason it mattered scientifically is that the compound activated a deeply studied longevity pathway through diet rather than fasting. Quick question before we go deeper. Tell me in the comments what country you are watching from. The biology of aging is the same everywhere, but access to plants like this one varies wildly depending on local food culture and import patterns. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is the moment, because what is coming next is where the honest scientific limits become really important. Here's the part I want to be careful about, because most online content covering this plant overstates what the research shows. The studies that produced these longevity findings were done in yeast, fruit flies, and C. elegans worms, not in humans. The connection to human longevity is observational, drawn from the dietary patterns of populations that eat this plant, alongside many other factors. There are no large or randomized controlled trials in humans showing that eating this plant extends human lifespan. That does not mean the connection is not real. It means the connection is plausible based on mechanism. But it is not yet proven by the kind of evidence that would support a strong human claim, and that distinction is the whole game in nutrition research. The most accurate framing is that this plant contains a compound that triggers a longevity pathway in lab organisms. It is also consumed daily by some of the longest-lived human populations on Earth, which is suggestive but not yet proof of causation. Those two facts are interesting. The bridge between them is suggestive, but the bridge itself is not yet fully established by human trials. Anyone telling you otherwise is overstating the science, and I would rather be honest about that than join the chorus of overpromising. This kind of distinction matters because it is exactly where most online health content fails, by treating mechanism studies as if they were human outcomes. A compound that extends lifespan in worms is interesting enough on its own. It does not need to be inflated into a guaranteed human result to be worth knowing about. There is one more piece worth covering before I name the plant. The same research group documented that DMC also reduced markers of inflammation and improved cellular stress responses in those laboratory models. A separate line of research from Japan and Korea documented that extracts from this plant suppressed tumor growth in laboratory settings. The same research also showed reduced post-meal blood sugar spikes in small human trials, though those were preliminary and not large-scale. A 2019 study linked regular consumption to reduced inflammatory markers, the same markers associated with heart disease, diabetes, and several other chronic conditions. These are early-stage findings, not definitive proof, but they are consistent with the broader pattern of what populations that eat this plant report about their health. Now to the question of why most Americans have never heard of this plant. Despite 3 centuries of documented use and a Nature Communications paper, the plant is called Ashitaba. The full scientific name is Angelica Keiskei, and it is a member of the carrot family native to a small group of volcanic islands south of Tokyo. The reason most Americans have never heard of it is regulatory, not conspiratorial, and the distinction matters because it changes what you can actually do about it. Here's how the system works. A food sold widely in the United States needs to qualify as generally recognized as safe, or it needs to go through a formal FDA approval pathway for a new dietary ingredient with documentation, testing, and review. Traditional Western foods qualify automatically based on long-established use. Foods native to other parts of the world require documentation, testing, and review. The cost of that pathway runs into the millions of dollars per ingredient paid by whichever company wants to sell it. Ashitaba is a plant. You cannot patent a plant, which means any company that paid for full approval would simply be opening the market for every competitor to sell the same thing for less. The result is regulatory limbo. Ashitaba is legal to sell, but as a dietary supplement with no health claims allowed on the label. This is the same status as many other traditional foods from other parts of the world that never went through the formal approval process. It is not banned, it is not suppressed, it is simply categorized as a supplement rather than a food with medical claims attached. You can find Ashitaba powder online imported from Japan, and you can buy Ashitaba seeds and grow it in a backyard. But you will not find fresh Ashitaba in an American grocery store, which is the practical result of the regulatory situation. This is not because anyone banned it. It is because the economics of bringing a non-patentable plant through American food regulation do not work for any company. That is a very different story from the one usually told online, where this plant is described as suppressed or hidden. The actual situation is less dramatic and more boring. The plant simply does not have a corporate champion willing to spend millions to put it in your supermarket, because there is no patent at the end of that investment. Quick thing, what I just covered is the surface. There's a complete protocol that takes everything you just heard and turns it into something you actually do every day. It is called Reset, the 14-day brain reboot. Day-by-day instructions, exact dosages, timing windows, and the science behind each one explained the same way I just walked through autophagy. Built around the same biological systems covered on this channel, cellular cleanup, mitochondrial function, and the daily routines that support these systems. The 14-day timeline is structured, so you can measure your own changes, energy, digestion, and general resilience as visible indicators. Less than $10 for the entire protocol, less than the cost of a single coffee per day across 2 weeks, with lifetime access included automatically. First link in the description below this video, but stay here, because how to actually use Ashitaba is what matters most. Here is how to access Ashitaba in the United States, since you cannot walk into a grocery store and buy it fresh. The The most reliable option is dried Ashitaba powder, available from specialty importers and online retailers that source from Japan. A typical daily amount is 1 to 2 teaspoons of powder, added to tea, smoothies, soups, or sprinkled into yogurt. The taste is green and bitter, similar to celery crossed with parsley, and most people find it tolerable mixed into other foods rather than consumed alone. A second option is growing it yourself. Ashitaba is hardy in USDA zones 7 through 10, tolerates partial shade, and grows well in containers for colder climates. Seeds are available from specialty seed suppliers, and a single plant produces enough leaves for steady weekly consumption. The plant is famously vigorous. The Japanese name tomorrow's leaf refers to how quickly a cut leaf is replaced, often within 24 hours during the growing season. That regrowth rate means one healthy plant on a windowsill can produce enough material for daily consumption, which is essentially the pattern the Okinawan centenarians have maintained for generations. The Japanese eat the leaves fresh in tempura and salads, dry them for tea, and use the stems in soups. Every part of the plant is edible. A third option is Ashitaba supplements in capsule form, which deliver a standardized dose but lose the food matrix that may matter for absorption and tolerance. For most people, the powder is the practical middle ground, accessible, affordable, and easy to integrate into existing meals. Quick observation, if you have made it this far, you already understand more about cellular longevity than 90% of adults. The reset protocol takes that understanding and gives it shape over 14 days. First link in the description, less than $10 for the complete sequence. And if this kind of breakdown is what you have been looking for, subscribe. Now stay with me, because the honest expectations matter. Let me be explicit about what eating Ashitaba will and will not do, because the gap between marketing and science here is large. Eating Ashitaba daily will not extend your lifespan in any dramatic, measurable way that has been proven in human trials. What it might do is provide a dietary source of a compound that activates a well-studied longevity pathway in laboratory organisms. That is genuinely interesting and probably worthwhile, but it is not the same as a proven anti-aging intervention, and any source telling you otherwise is overstating the evidence. Ashitaba is also not a substitute for the other things that influence longevity: sleep, physical activity, social connection, low-calorie density diet, and stress management. The populations that eat Ashitaba do all of those things too, and untangling the contribution of any single food is essentially impossible. If you look at Okinawa specifically, the longevity advantage has been narrowing in younger generations who eat the same Ashitaba but have adopted more Western dietary patterns overall. That alone tells you that Ashitaba is not the single answer. It is one input in a broader pattern that depends on the whole pattern continuing. What is reasonable is to add a daily portion of Ashitaba to an already healthy lifestyle and treat it as one small input among many. What is not reasonable is to expect any single plant to override the rest of how you live. 3 common mistakes I want you to avoid before changing anything tomorrow morning. Mistake 1, treating Ashitaba as a miracle plant because the human evidence is suggestive at best, not definitive. Mistake 2, paying premium prices for branded Ashitaba products when basic imported powder works just as well for most purposes. Mistake 3, ignoring the rest of the dietary pattern that surrounds Ashitaba in the populations that eat it. One thing before this video closes, the broader lesson is about how much remains useful in food traditions that Western science is only beginning to catalog properly. Not every traditional food survives serious investigation, but some do, and Ashitaba sits in the small group that has at least begun to. The honest version of stories like this one is more interesting than the conspiracy version, because the real answer is usually structural rather than malicious. The plant is not hidden and the science is not buried. The issue is just that nobody has a financial incentive to put it in front of you, because you cannot patent a plant. That is its own kind of lesson about how information moves through modern markets, separate from the question of whether Ashitaba itself does anything useful. If this video clicked for you, subscribe. There is a new video on this channel every day on the next strange thing your body is doing right now. And if you want the full Reset 14-Day protocol, day by day, with dosages and timing, first link below. Less than $10, less than a single coffee per day for 2 weeks. Your body is running software that has not been updated in 200,000 years. Tomorrow's video is about something connected to everything we just covered. It works on the same cellular cleanup system, but in a direction you will not expect. It is the kind of intervention that sounds like the opposite of what we just discussed, but ends up working through the same underlying pathway. That is next.